Are any of the Llama models capable of reasoning? I have spent quite some time to get to the bottom line so that you don't have to. To answer this, I will show you how to locally run multiple main Llama 2 models and test them against the Orca 2 model, which is claimed to be specialized in answering reasoning problems. I will also show 5 ways you can use to improve the results of language models. I will test these 5 steps on a famous reasoning test, which is used to evaluate LLMs in the Hugging Face evaluation leaderboard. And the comparison results are truly shocking. So let's get into it. This multi-step mathematical reasoning test that is included in the GSM 8K article is one example implemented in their official reasoning tests on various language models. Humans obtained a high accuracy score on this test, so let's see if LLMs can solve it too. I have included more details of this test and this example in my previous video about Hugging Face evaluation leaderboard, so if you've not watched it, make sure to do so. I'll put a link to it in the description. Here's the problem. Best bakes for 24 batches of cookies in a week. If these cookies are shared among 16 people equally, how many cookies each person consume? Feel free to pause the video to check its solution too. First off, we need to run Llama locally using Ollama. If you're not familiar with Ollama, it's basically a program that helps you install and run many language models on your own PC and make custom models for your own personal use cases. All you need to do is go to the Ollama website and follow the instructions of your operating system. First, I'll copy this Linux command into my terminal to install Ollama. It will take a few seconds and the file is relatively small with only 284 megabytes. When you install any model via Ollama, you can use this list command to check them. For now, it's empty. To download any of the Llama 2 models, from the models, go to this Llama 2 page and under the tags, copy the command of any model into your terminal. We will start this test with the base Llama 2 model with 7 billion parameters which only require 3 GB of space and 8 GB of RAM. Simply type this command Ollama pool llama 2. Once installed, use the run command with the same syntax to run it. I just ran a quick message to see if all is working well, asking it to introduce itself. Then I pasted this reasoning problem and gave it an introductory sentence of what it's supposed to do. As you can see, its response, it's a bit chatty, but it clearly understands that it's a stepwise problem and tries to give each step a title even though it repeats itself a lot. It walks you through its reasoning process, gets the first step right about the total number of dozens, but it gets the rest wrong because it doesn't calculate the cookies per dozen step. So this model gets a clear fail. From now, we will test 5 different options to see if we can improve the results. The first one is to make a custom model file and set the parameters more strictly to optimize this model for reasoning. It's very easy to do so. Just head over to Ollama's GitHub page and under the Ollama model file, check out these parameters. There is also an example that you can follow. So back in my terminal, I first make a folder to save my model file. Then I use the nano command to make a file and give it a name. The from option is a required argument to specify which model you want to use as the base. Here I'm using the same base Llama 2 model. Then I set the temperature to a lower value to increase its factuality. I think 0.3 is good for now. The syntax is parameter, space, the name of that parameter, space, and the value. Then I set the context window size to give enough room for longer questions. I also use 2 other parameters. The first one is called top K, which controls the model's diverse responses, but higher values can lead to hallucination, so I lower it to 0.3. And the second one is called top P, which controls how strict the model should be. I'm lowering these two to make it more conservative and factual to be able to solve reasoning problems. The last thing is to give the model or the custom model a direction or role as a prompt. Here I'm prompting it to act as an expert in multi-step mathematical reasoning. Save and exit the file with Ctrl X. Now back to the main terminal screen. We need to instruct Ollama to create a new custom model using this model file. Here's the command for it. Ollama create, give a name to your custom model, use the F flag to enable deleting it, then the path to the model file ending with its name. All is left is to run this custom model as any other model using the run command. I gave it the exact same reasoning problem. This model is less verbose, more coherent in reasoning, and less repetitive than the base Llama 2 model. But even though I set the model file with very conservative parameters, it also reached the wrong conclusion, and the answer is even worse than the base model. So despite some improvements, this custom model gets a fail too. Now let's test the second way to improve the results, and that is to switch to a text model instead of chat models, which are mainly designed for conversations. Back to the Llama models, I picked the text equivalent of the base model with the same size, number of parameters, and RAM needed. Instead of first pulling the model, you can directly run it. Ollama will first pull it for you before running it, so it's cool. Gave this model the same problem, and straight away I can see some improvements. No chat introduction at all, no step titles, it goes straight into the answer with 4 steps which are more succinct. But at the end, this model also gets to the wrong answer. Feel free to pause the video and read the responses. For example, it concludes that 15 people won't get any cookies. I have no idea how it reached this conclusion. Unfortunately, even with all the improvements, this model also gets a fail. Before I show you the third way, I need to remove this model to free up some space. You can do this using the rm command with the same syntax. You can also use list to check if it's removed from the list of installed models. Now testing the third way to improve the results, and that is to use a higher quantized version of the model. All Ollama base models use 4-bit quantization to compress the models to use less memory, but it also means less precision, so you need to consider this trade-off. I'm going with the highest quantization of the same model size, which is the Q8 or 8-bit quantized version of the same 7B parameter model, which needs the same 8 GB of RAM as before, but the model is bulkier in size with 7.5 GB. Gave it the same problem. This time the model is spewing out a bunch of philosophical questions, like questioning the validity of the problem itself, such as why were the cookies shared among all 16 people equally? Can we say that each person eats 40 cookies, and then asks for further clarification of the question? So far, it seems higher quantization doesn't necessarily mean better results. We will come back to this point later again, but for now, this model also gets a fail. This takes us to the fourth way to improve a model's responses, and that's to help the model with further instructions and explanation of the question. So I clarified the problem for it with clear instructions and clues on how to calculate the answer in 3 steps. But it doesn't get the clues and goes on to alter the problem and offer another problem. It came up to the number 96 for the total cookies, but failed to divide it among 16 people. So in this specific case, even clarifying the question couldn't help. Fail. At this point, the fifth and the final way that we can use to improve the model's response is to use a larger parameter size model that is believed to improve nuanced recognition of the context. I'm going to first try the 13 billion parameter model, which requires 16 GB of RAM. I also give it additional instructions like the previous model. Let's see how it goes. This one is clearly a disaster. Not only it got it wrong, but also started a loop by asking itself the question I asked and answering the same answer again and again. So strange. Even with the clue of 12 cookies in a dozen, it just repeats itself and then makes up a completely different question about car mileage and gives a link to its training data, which shows to be a library of problem and solution resources. I had to remove this model and install the largest version of Llama 2, which is 70 billion parameter model, which took ages to install because of its huge size. It also took ages to predict the next word in the responses, and all it did was to confess it couldn't answer the question without additional help. I gave it a bit more help, and after so much overthinking, it again questioned the purpose behind this problem and why we should divide the cookies among 16 people. It seems the larger models are so much worse at inferencing from the text and arriving at logical conclusions than the smaller ones. I'm totally disappointed by Llama 2 for reasoning problems. I checked Meta's website and noticed that in their benchmark table, this GSM 8K test has received the lowest scores for all Llama 2 models among all other tests, for example, the HelloSwag. If you have watched my previous video too, you remember that the small and very large GPT-3 models produced more inaccurate and untruthful responses. the moment of truth with the Orca model. Microsoft claims that Orca 2 is, quote, fine-tuned version of Meta's Llama 2 models. The model is designed to excel particularly in reasoning, end quote. So I started with the base model with the 7b parameter, which resulted in really strange answers such as repeated subtractions that I've got no idea how it came up with. And as you can see on the screen, how it also repeats itself. This was the last straw, and I decided to give Orca only one more chance. Orca's largest model, the 13b, at the time of making this video. It was a last-ditch attempt, and to my surprise, not only did the 13b Orca 2 model reach the correct answer, but it also took precise and logical steps to do so without verbosity and irrelevant responses on questions. I was quite impressed that I even gave it a pat on the back. This reasoning test has a clear winner, but the journey tells you that you cannot trust any of the LLMs right off the bat, especially if you're trying to incorporate any of the models into your apps or business projects when the stakes are high. And as always, consider subscribing and do let me know if you have tested any of these models on your questions or data.